Um, so, sir, we wanted to talk to you today about just your memory of July 16th. Um, if you can kind of walk me through what happened that day, even right before it, what you were doing at the NOSC, and just kind of how that tragic day played out for you.
Sure. So actually, that day was a little bit different than most other days. I had sent most of my staff members to Knoxville to the Reserve Center there to help the staff there in Knoxville prepare for one of their command inspections or assessments. And we had just finished ours, so it was an opportunity for my folks to get out of the office for a little bit. And I had planned on going, but we had some things going on at the house where my wife and children were living. Our AC had gone out, and I didn't want to be out of town when that was getting worked on, so I decided to stay back. And it was a beautiful summer day. I remember thinking that, hey, I want some fresh air this morning, so I opened my window and I was enjoying that fresh air and the birds singing outside, and that beautiful morning was interrupted by some squealing tires and a crash. And initially, I thought that maybe somebody got in an accident on the road in the river park. And I looked out of my window, couldn't see any accidents on that road. And then, so I figured maybe somebody got in an accident on Amnicola and thought maybe they needed some help. So I got up from my desk and went around to the other side of my office so that I could see the um, the Amnicola Highway. And as I was walking around my desk, Petty Officer Smith, who is my command duty officer, um, ran into my office and said, "Sir, someone just crashed through the gate. What do we do?" And this is something that we had talked about as a staff quite a bit because of the heightened threat level. There were a lot of terrorist organizations that were making threats to military members, first responders, and their families. And so we had talked about what we would do if somebody crashed through our gate, and what we would do, how we would respond if somebody came into the building with a weapon. And so anyway, I told him to call the police, and he left my office, went back towards where his office was, and I'd been bringing a personal weapon with me because of that heightened threat level, and I got that weapon out of my bag and an extra magazine. And when I stood up, the terrorist was outside my window running down the sidewalk towards the entrance of the Reserve Center. And prior to reporting to the Reserve Center there in Chattanooga, I'd been the officer in charge of a security boat detachment in Guam. And in preparation for that duty assignment, I went through some small arms training and some like small unit tactics training as well in the expeditionary combat skills course. And one thing that they trained us on was threat recognition and how to justify using deadly force. And that's made up of the threat triangle in the military, and that's the three sides are opportunity, intent, and capability. And I believe that the terrorist had just shown his intent by crashing through our gate. He clearly had the capability. He was holding an assault rifle and had a load-bearing vest. I thought maybe it was loaded with explosives, but it turned out to be loaded with extra magazines for his rifle and pistol. And the opportunity is that last side of the threat triangle, and that just meant that he had access to us. There was nothing we could really do to keep him from getting to us. So that meant that he was an imminent threat, and I raised my weapon and fired at him as quickly as I could and as many times as I could until I couldn't see him anymore. And I thought that he would drop from getting hit by my rounds, or that he would turn towards me and shoot at me, but neither of those things happened. He continued running down the sidewalk towards the entrance. And so I looked back to my door to see if Petty Officer Smith or any of the other sailors were at my door, because we had talked about if we have an active shooter, that we would as many people as possible would come into my office so that we could get out of the building once the shooter was in the building. Because we talked about the options for active killer is run, hide, fight. If we can, we want to run. We want to get out of the danger zone. If we can't do that, then we'll hide, shelter in a secure place. And if we can't do that, then we'll fight back. And so I wanted to give them an opportunity to run. But I didn't see Petty Smith there. There weren't any other sailors there either. So I shut the door and went back to the window to see if there were any other assailants or if police officers were responding. And I didn't see either of those things. Turns out Officer O'Brien was probably just past where I could see him. He had followed the terrorist into the river park and had stopped a little ways away from our gate because he had figured that the terrorist was going to detonate his vehicle. And but I couldn't see him. And so I really believe that I was at a crossroads at that point. As I mentioned, I had an extra magazine. I thought, well, maybe I could re-engage the terrorist and maybe stop him. But I thought that since he didn't turn towards me and shoot at me, that he was really motivated to get into the building, and maybe what I thought was that load-bearing vest full of explosives was explosives. And I believe that he was just trying to get in the building so he could detonate himself. And I was afraid that if I tried to re-engage him, that wouldn't make anything any better. And if I ended up getting shot by him and cried out, that the sailors that were in the building and the Marines that were in the building and were sheltered and in a secure location may be tempted to run to my aid and may put them at risk. So I decided to get out of the building and try to be part of the solution. I didn't want to be part of the problem, be part of the solution to stop this threat. Since I had seen him, I could identify him and maybe be part of the response to stop him. So I jumped out of my window, and as I ran to the front gate, I saw Officer O'Brien there. He was just getting out of his vehicle and had just gotten his rifle. I told him what I saw, and I thought he was going to say, "Okay, let's go get him." But he said, I'm waiting for backup. I need you to wait behind my vehicle." And as I waited behind his vehicle, um, I could hear the terrorist shooting inside the building. At one point, he actually shot out of the front of the building towards Officer O'Brien and another police officer that was responding, and then went back into the building. Could hear him shooting in the building some more. And then eventually he exited the back of the building and started engaging some of the Marines in the back. And then that's where he was ultimately stopped by the Chattanooga Police Department. But very tragically, uh, when he entered the building, he shot Petty Officer Smith almost right away. Um, and then on the Navy side, then went to the Marine Corps side. And when he exited and made his way into the motor pool, that's where he shot and killed four Marines: Gunny Sullivan, Staff Sergeant Wyatt, Sergeant Holmquist, and Lance Corporal Wells, and also shot and injured Officer Pedigo. Um, I think one thing that I don't often talk about is what happened prior to me even leaving for work that day. And the article in the Times Free Press mentioned it, that I had a very vivid dream right before my alarm clock went off. And I'm not a person that asks for signs for God or from God or base decisions on things that happen to me as like it's an extra revelation from God. But that dream very clearly put me on edge, and the whole morning I was kind of thinking through how would we respond if we were attacked. And also because of my background as an aviator, and as a flight instructor, one thing that we do a lot in flight training is simulators and practice emergency procedures so that when something happens, we're not thinking, oh, what do I do now that my engine is on fire? We've already thought through how are we gonna handle that emergency. And so as I was sitting at my desk, I was thinking through what would we do if somebody came through with an explosive vehicle, and what would we do if an active shooter came in? And so I was playing through my mind. I've got my weapon here. I can get it out quickly and engage that threat and try to stop the threat. And I think that was something that was used to preserve life, because even though I didn't stop the terrorists, my shots were the first shots fired that morning, and my sailors heard them. The Marines on the other side of the building heard them, and that gave them some time to get into the run, hide, fight mode. But also, um, we believe that the terrorist was going through the building a lot slower than he would have been otherwise, because he wasn't expecting somebody to be firing at him. And I'm just very thankful that I had that opportunity try to engage him and slow him down at least a little bit so that um, more lives were not lost that morning.
Can I ask you what that dream was?
Yeah, I in the dream I was talking with a bearded man from like a Middle Eastern ethnicity, and there was a group of people behind him, mixed ethnicities, but all holding weapons, and this man was holding a weapon as well. And I'd been troubled about the social political environment that we were in at that time. Really, it was much like the environment that we're in now, where there's a lot of division and um, a lot of I guess just division is the right word to put. And we we have differences in different groups in our nation. Clearly, we don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, but that doesn't mean that we need to turn to violence because of our differences. And that's kind of what I was telling this person in my dream. I said, "You're an American, and I'm American. Even though we have different skin colors, we should be able to work through our differences rather than trying to kill each other and be at each other's throats. Don't you agree?" And he said no, and he was going to try to kill my family and me. And that's when my alarm went off right then. And um, that's something that I think is really uh, was really powerful about the aftermath of the attack in Chattanooga is the way that we overcame our differences and the way that uh, the city and the community just rallied around the service members and the families that lost their loved ones and showed their support. And we realized that there are more important things than some of our political differences and even some of our the differences in faith, that we should be loving each other as ourselves rather than um, being ugly about our differences. And that's something that I really want to remember and honor this 10th year anniversary, is remembering how we did overcome those differences. Because for one thing, a nation divided against itself is weak. There's the saying, "United we stand, divided we fall," and I think that's something that we need to really take to heart. And plus, that's one thing that can make our country great is being united. We want to build communities that our children can enjoy. I've got 10 children, and you have children as well. And I think the goal of every parent is that they are able to hand off a community and a society better than they found it to their children, and hand that legacy down. And I hope that we can do that.
And I know you mentioned some of your children are older. Do you talk to your kids about what happened that day and what lessons you've learned from it?
Yeah, all the time. Really, one of the biggest lessons, though, is, I mean, there's immediately after the attack and for the past 10 years, really, I've wondered, did I respond appropriately? Were there things that I could have done better tactically? Are there things that I could have done prior to the attack that may have made us a harder target, that then the guy would have chosen to go somewhere else? And probably always the answer to could you have done more is yes. Um, would those things have made a difference? I don't know. We don't get to play that game where we get to try it again and see if it made a difference. But one of the more important lessons is accepting that we are human, and because we're humans, we have a limited ability in what we can do. We have a limited understanding of all the circumstances and what the right decision is. It oftentimes the decisions that we make, especially in those situations, aren't black and white, and we just have to do the best that we know how to do, and then understand that the results are ultimately not up to us. That we can do everything right, and then the results may not be what we would like them to be. And just coming to accept that um, for the past 10 years, I've questioned, was I right? Was I a coward? Was I courageous? Was I brave? Did I act in honor or did I act in dishonor? And those feelings and thoughts have tormented me really up until maybe a couple years ago when I was finally able to understand and accept that I, if even if I did everything right, I may not have been able to prevent the loss of life. And and also the understanding that there is a beauty and there's a kind of a beauty and it's beautiful to see people acting in a way that is selfless and where they show that they're willing to do hard things for other people. And even if that means that they weren't ultimately successful, just somebody being willing to do that is kind of a wonderful thing. And uh, we should be looking for that in other people and give ourselves credit when we act that way as well, and not beat ourselves up when um, the results weren't what we had hoped them to be. I know a lot of veterans. That was my only um, combat experience really. I flew helicopters in the Navy and the fleet. Most of that was logistical flying and search and rescue and medevacs and I was supposed to. I was initially scheduled to deploy to the Middle East as a medevac pilot, but that ended up getting canceled, and so most of my flying was humanitarian in nature. And then I was a flight instructor, so that wasn't combat. And then my first brush with combat was actually in Chattanooga on July 16th. And um, I think after spending some time with some combat veterans with it used to be Operation Song, now it's Freedom Sings there in Chattanooga, I got to see that the feelings that I was struggling with were common with combat veterans, that maybe they end up getting an award for what they did in combat, but their best friend died, or they thought, well, maybe I could have done more and saved some of my other buddies, and I wasn't able to do all that I wanted to do. And so I think there's a hesitancy to share that story because they carry that guilt, and then just a common feeling of I just wish I could have done more. And sometimes it's that survivor's guilt as well. And I think that just my small taste of it has helped me to understand some of those combat veterans that I've brushed shoulders with and come in contact with. Um, it helps me to value their suffering some more and just identify with it.
And such a lesson that can be applied to so many things on a smaller scale in life.
Yeah,
At
absolutely.
all the things that we have to endure that are hard. I wanted to ask you about the moment, and we talked to Sean O'Brien about this when you first encountered him. He says he had tunnel vision that day. He doesn't even remember that encounter because, he was focusing on trying to get to that shooter.
Mhm.
And what he's told us is that that policy has changed now within the region and after research about engaging active shooters, that now the thought process is even a lone officer goes in right away. And, from your story, it seems like that's what you kind of expected to happen when you first saw him there. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And um, I think it's interesting that Officer O'Brien he talks about experiencing tunnel vision because I was experiencing some of those similar things when you get that hormone dump. It's just a lot of adrenaline, and so your heart rate starts going up, and some interesting things happen. One thing that happened to me is time really slowed down when I remember seeing the terrorist. I thought he was just walking down the sidewalk, but I was firing at him as quickly as I could, and my bullets were across my window. So clearly he was running. And and then when I exited my window and ran to the front gate, I passed the vehicle that the terrorist was using. And I'm kind of a car guy. I used to own a Mustang, and he was driving a Mustang convertible, but in my mind, I saw a convertible BMW. So some of those similar tunnel vision effects. Um, but yeah, when I saw him, I was afraid that he might shoot me because I was still holding my weapon. So as I approached him, I had my hands in my hands in the air, and I I thought that he was getting out of his vehicle to go to the building. But as he told me that he was waiting for backup, in my mind, I thought, well, that makes sense. I think that was a very common practice at the time. And but as we waited for backup, it was the longest minutes of my life as I could hear the terrorist shooting and just wondering where my sailors were, where the Marines were. I had no idea that we had so many Marines in the motor pool working on those vehicles back there. But just it was a very long 10 minutes as we waited for the threat to be stopped. And I'm very thankful to have met Sean O'Brien, and actually we've developed a pretty good friendship since then. We used to work together to give the Chattanooga Police Department officers some active shooter training. I think we did it every week for about a year, and just telling the story, and then they would go into an abandoned building and practice some of their tactics. But at that point, they had already changed their tactics to each police officer. If there's a lone police officer, as you said, they would go in right away instead of waiting for backup. But we've encouraged each other over the years as we come up on the anniversary of the attack, and then other times as well as we come to each other's mind, because I think we both struggle with, could we have made things better if we would have changed the way we responded? Would it have been better for everybody? And uh, so I'm thankful for him, thankful really for his bravery and his service to our community, and as well as the other officers that responded that day that stopped the threat, because it could have been way worse.
For sure. And are you glad that training has now changed, being a person that's been through something like that you have?
Yeah, I am. I think it's really I think maybe we misunderstood as a society how active shooter events would unfold, and kind of the mindset of these active shooters, that they were not necessarily just targeting any individual, but trying to kill as many people as possible. And the sooner we can turn that hunter into the hunted and have them start trying to respond to something that's trying to end their life, then they're no longer the actor. They're responding to the response of their threat. So that ends up being much better for the people that are in the building. For example, if it's in a building, and it's it's a very sad thing that we have so many of these events now. There've been quite a few events since July 16th, and we've seen how the change in tactics of those first responders have improved the outcome, I think, significantly.
Yeah. Well, sir, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very welcome.